Welcome to the Gold Newsletter Podcast, your bank of knowledge of investments, economics, and geopolitics. Go to goldnewsletter.com for our publications and archives to increase your wealth monetarily and educationally.
This is Fergus Hodgson with the Gold Newsletter Podcast. I'm so glad to be back for the regular format of the show. I'm in Guatemala after the New Orleans Investment Conference last week. And I have with me none other than the editor of mining.com, Frik Els. Frik, welcome to the show.
Good morning. Thanks, Fergus. Great to be here.
Mate, I've got to say that the topic today is this. I'm going to read the headline here. Nevada Copper building the first U.S. copper mine in a decade. So we're going to discuss this copper prospect out there in Nevada. But I must admit that I had a suspicion that you were from South Africa, reading your name. And Kiwis have an affection for South Africans, given the Springboks or the rugby team. So I'm going to quiz you a bit about that for a second.
Sure.
Yeah, it says you went to... I mean, you've got an odd bio. You've written for publications such as the British Airways In-Flight magazine, which I don't know how someone gets into that.
Yeah, it was my background is journalism, so I've covered different industries. That was sort of the regional British Airways service there, and I was part of a huge media group. So I even wrote for, if you can believe this, I wrote the tech column for Men's Health. So
oh wow,
I've gone from I've covered a few industries, just to keep things interesting.
Pay the bills, yeah. So he went to Wits University, or how do you pronounce this? University of Witwatersrand?
Wits.
Just Witwatersrand. But how do you pronounce the full name?
Oh, Witwatersrand.
Right, so are all those classes in English, or they have some in Afrikaans?
No, I think they're 100% English. Yeah.
I'll just say again that New Zealanders, we have such an affection for South Africans because so many have come. And in my high school days, I had this biology teacher called Mr. Neil Smoller, and we used to say he had one of these trophy heads. That South Africans had these big heads, and he was one of our favorites. So, and then just give me some wisdom on this. Is the term Yapi for South African, is that negative or just neutral?
I think it's that widely used. I would say, it's not pejorative, but it's, somewhere in between.
It's not one you use yourself. Okay. So he is now in Vancouver, Canada. We actually did a show on how Vancouver is the hub for mining.
Yeah, especially juniors. I believe there's some 1,400 or maybe fewer now, junior mining companies registered here in Vancouver.
Yeah, there's really no other city in the world that even comes close to Vancouver for the number of, I don't have the number in front of me right now, but it's maybe 4 times the next biggest city. And so, he's been 15 years in financial journalism. And the article that caught my attention was about this Nevada copper mine. And it's called Pumpkin Hollow in the Silver State, which apparently is the nickname for Nevada. It's going into production next year, but apparently it's going to be expanded. When is it going to be expanded? You write 4 times the size. So there's a mine that's going to be expanded to 4 times the size. Over what time frame?
It's very much a phased approach. I think they did that deliberately. So they didn't want to start off plan for a big mine and then, things don't turn out that way. So the first phase is soon, and that's for about 27 kilotons. And then they said they could be ready with the full 100 kilotons mine in 2020, which is soon as well.
Yeah, very quick. And this is in Yerington. One thing that, obviously I work in journalism too. Do you describe yourself? You put here. Let me read your disclaimer. Frik Els does not own shares or hold positions in any of the equities he writes about. Okay. Do you call yourself a straight news journalist? That must be very hard in the mining space.
Yes. Sort of the the mining industry, the junior market. There's a thriving retail investor scene.
Yes.
It's a tricky market, but you can make lots of money if you time things right, or if you have
Good information.
maybe some exactly. So I just decided from the start, just to make things crystal clear, is exactly that disclaimer I said there. That just makes things so much easier, and I can speak about companies to my heart's delight without being tripped up by conflicts of interest.
And one of the odd things, you're right here, for Yerington, the place, which only has 3,000 people, they've been hanging around for 40 years since the last copper venture closed, which, that's longer than I've been alive. So what, I don't get it. Why did this, if this is such a promising option, why did it hang around for 40 years?
They've looked at this and explored this and drilled this property for 10 years, and they just sort of never got to the point where they could pull the trigger. I think they came pretty close in 2015 or, even before then, and then you had copper going below $2 a pound, and, all of a sudden all those economics, fall out the window. And in the interim years, there's definitely regulations, red tape, all sorts of things kept them back. Not exactly a encouraging copper price through this time. There were ups and downs, but that's the problem for the mining industry always is, copper can rise 30% in a year, but it takes 5 years to even start to think about building a new mine. So I think that it's a combination of that.
I was just looking at the price before giving you a call, and as you said, between 2014 and the end of 2016, the price just really took a hit. I'm not sure what the percentage is, but maybe 1/3 or more. So and then it crept back until earlier this year. It got almost to its past highs, but then it took another hit in the last summer. So where do we stand now? I'm no expert on copper, fundamental or technical analysis. So maybe you want to give some wisdom on are there any? What's the speculation as to whether it's too low, too high for this kind of mine to go ahead?
I think it's still at a good price. It has come down this summer. Everybody got a huge scare. I think we went from 330 down to 260, which is a huge move. And this also, the other side of that is it's sort of against expectations as well. You just get some confidence in...
What caused that decline at that time? Because, it's at around 280 now versus 330 earlier in the year. It
was, I think, sort of a crisis of confidence. It was U.S.-China trade war, and what would be the impact of that? Copper is, as you know, so essential in different industries. So
yes.
It can easily fall victim to broader economic trends. So I think that made things uncertain. And then on top of that, you had expectations of supply shortages and disruptions that didn't quite pan out. I read a report recently where they used to factor in, say, a 6% swing in production due to disruptions, to strikes or the weather or things like that. And companies have now become better at managing copper mines, so they're now only building in a sort of a 3% output swing over a year. So the supply is become more steady, more predictable. So I think that also, there was the strike at Escondida, which is, it's bigger than the second biggest mine by a factor of 2. So it's the only mine that produces 1 million tons of copper a year.
Okay.
There was no strike there. 2017, there was a 44-day strike, and they sorted out their problems. Now they have 3 years without any labor action. So it was that sort of thing. The supply looked more secure, and the outlook sort of got a little bit cloudy.
I see. Yeah, in my own view, I've written about how this trade war is really more a media storm, and I'm optimistic that the Chinese and the United States will get over this hump. But One interesting point you made was that, it was discovered back in 1960 and only really, still hasn't really been utilized to its full potential. And you said it could have been a magnetite mine. Now, give us your wisdom on what that means. I mean, what role is there magnetite here? What's the deal?
Yes, it was actually U.S. Steel owned the property.
Yes.
At some point, and I mean that's where they were obviously looking for for iron ore there. So there is a resource there. It needs a much higher price, or maybe not much higher, but a higher price for iron ore. And I think the iron ore mining industry has really been ceded to the big boys. You really have to be a large player. You have to be a Rio Tinto, BHP, Vale, something along those lines to Fortescue to compete. So, I mean, never say never, but I think it's going to be a copper mine for the rest of its life. Yeah.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, they never quite made the decision to build the mine, and then there's this apparently a big dose of confidence from Pella Investments. So you've heard here, there was a $380 million recapitalization, which really greased the wheels to make this come to be. What do you have any insight? Not inside information, but do you have any wisdom or knowledge as to what happened to flick that switch?
I think it was probably led by Paula. I do not have inside information. But as far as I could tell, it was Paula Investments and others looking at this project and saying, we're leaving money on the table here. This has got lots of potential, but we need to sort of restart the whole thing. I think, the project was sort of drifting, and then people looked at it and decided, okay, we need to go with, there's potential here. So, they had a new board, they did the recap. They brought in all sorts of people and, really got the thing going.
And you said the firm is Nevada Copper, and they're the ones that's gone under this reformation. And this is just an interesting story because you said the new CEO is Matt Gilley, and he was from Barrick Gold. And you say that people with his experience don't have so many options. There are not many new big mines to be led. So it was a natural, it fit well with his story. And there was one quote from him that caught my attention. Quote, "You don't build a mine within budget and on time from a remote corporate head office," unquote. So do you know Matt Gilley personally?
I don't. No. I met him when I did the site visit. Yeah.
Okay. So basically the leadership has changed. And then there are other people involved. Tom Albanese from Rio Tinto, Ernie Nutter, and Rafael Genovese of Capital Group. So there's a big team behind this. You've written a piece here, which I'm guessing is around 1,200 words. It's a lengthy article, but what should people know that perhaps you couldn't address in the piece?
I think, I do speak about that, but on the tour of the site, we also met the city managers of Yerington, the mayor, and the general manager of the county, etc., etc.
Right.
And obviously Tom Dyer. So I think the big thing that maybe was sort of the final piece to fall in was the deal the city did, transferring the federal land to the city, and that property was then sold to Nevada Copper. So that streamlined the whole thing. So they're building this mine on private land, which just sort of changes the dynamics quite a bit. Obviously, the town is fully behind this. I mean, they've been living with with copper mining, for 60, 70 years. I don't know how long the previous mine was in operation, but it was a mining town if ever there was a mining town. So I think that was quite, an interesting part of the puzzle. And I think maybe that, sort of model might be replicated somewhere else. Because everybody building copper mines in the U.S. or any mine in the U.S., it's just such a long undertaking. if something takes a decade and you're operating in such volatile industries and volatile commodity prices, 10 years is a long time to be advancing a project before you even start to think about seeing some returns. So, like Matt Gilley says in the piece, it's not labor costs, it's not whatever, it's delays that kills a project. So, if something comes from this, if this becomes a model for other projects in the U.S., maybe specifically, then I think it could lead to a bit of a renaissance.
Yeah, back at the New Orleans conference, I was chatting with Adrian Day, and he underlined your point that this mining industry is just so tough given the time frames involved and the enormous investment. That's why it is so hit and miss. The quote here from Nevada Copper's VP for Environment and External Relations, Timothy Dyer, is that the project still adheres to all environmental regulations. We're cutting red tape, not corners, which is a lovely line. And yeah, as you said, the change has been that the land is now privately owned, so I guess there's slightly less, well, not slightly, there is less red tape involved. Yeah, man, there's so much in this piece. You put down price fixing. What is this claim here that there's about price fixing or about using futures?
Yeah.
Do you want to clarify this?
Yeah, that is just sort of a play on the contracts they were using there. So the mine is being built through I think cementation is the main contractor there.
Yes.
So the contracts they have installed there is EPC contracts. So you sign a contract with the engineering company and the construction company, and they are responsible for everything, engineering, procurement, and construction, and the management of it. So what used to happen is, all right, you sign a contract to build this mine, and then after that, you manage the process together. And you can imagine that it's to and fro between the contractor and the mine management about, things going wrong or budget overruns, etc., etc.
You could become beholden to one of the contractors, right? Or vulnerable. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, with these types of contracts, which, like I said, there is is used often in Africa and Australia and other parts. Everything is sort of outsourced to the contractor, so they have to build the mine on time and within budget. And there's a risk premium built in, but it sort of just sets budgets. Its budgets and timelines are very much set in stone, and it's the responsibility of the contractor. It's not a sort of a joint project where the one blames the other for overruns or whatever. So I think it's more of a clear-cut sort of thing.
And the quote here. With EPCs, everything is worked out beforehand. The EPC is the engineering, procurement, and construction contract. It's a good thing for the industry. It forces discipline.
Yeah.
Okay, following a $70 million streaming deal for gold and silver from the deposit with financiers Triple Flag and a second public offering, the project is fueled to the finish for a capital outlay of $197 million. I'm getting a bit lost here because there was a $380 million recapitalization, but that was not all associated with this particular mine, I guess.
That was just to sort of get the company, back in business. There was the recap, and then I can't remember exactly what the streaming deal part of that recap.
Yes.
Or if that came later. But so with the recap and with the streaming deal, they have the 197, to build the first phase, which is a 27,000 ton mine.
And let's just, moving away from just that one particular mine, one of the other articles you wrote more recently was that copper price drop prompts expansion rethink at top producer. So you've been covering copper a bit. Do you want to clarify what's going on there? Basically, with the more recent price drop, what sort of impact that is having? How severe is its impact?
There's sort of there's opinions about copper is a little bit all over the place at the moment, But I think what most agree on is sort of the long-term prospects of copper. The electric vehicle story and the energy storage story. All of that, it might be overhyped in the short term, but in the long term, it will have a huge impact on, especially copper. Forget about cobalt and lithium and graphite and those things for a moment. Just copper, by its very nature, will be impacted by this. So longer term, copper's prospects are bright. But in the short term, if you have to sign a check for $1 billion or whatever it is, and copper is around 260 or 280 and it's not going any higher, then you might just wait. I mean, so many fingers were burnt during the previous height, 2011, 2010, thereabouts.
Yes.
With people spending vast amounts of money, throwing money around, and then in the end, not showing any returns. The watchword for the industry has been discipline and looking after shareholders and not embarking on these huge growth opportunities. So I think the industry has been chastened, I would say. So when they're erring on the side of caution when it comes to new projects. So I think longer term copper is solid, but shorter term, there's still nervousness about overspending.
Yeah, one thing interesting, if you look at the chart for copper, you're right. The pricing has basically been steady, or not so steady, but it's gone down considerably over the last 7 years. But the trading of it has gone up. There's actually considerably much more being, changing hands. So that suggests that supply, as you said, has become more reliable or efficient at getting it to market. How long have you been with mining.com?
Since 2011.
Okay, and what is the evolution of this publication? Is it growing, shrinking? I mean, what is its future with you leading the editorial side at least?
We're actually in the early days of sort of a redevelopment of it. We've grown substantially. This month we're going to have 400,000 unique visitors to mining.com.
Okay. That's very good. That's that's probably about maybe 75,000 Alexa ranking, something like that.
Yeah. We're proud of what we've done. We started from scratch in 2011. I joined about 3 months after the first page was published.
Great.
Yes, we don't see any reason that we would stop growing, and it's mining, so we're not going to be a consumer publication anytime soon. But our whole focus is to serve all of mining, so and mining across the globe. So we're not a publication that tries to push junior gold explorers down your throat. We're also interested in if there is environmental protests in South America. That very much pertains to mining as well. If
Yes.
there is a change of government in Mongolia, that very much pertains to mining as well. So we want to, serve as large an audience as possible.
Okay, yeah, so the website is mining.com. You can find Frik Els. Well, I just sent a note to him on LinkedIn. Where else should people follow you?
You can follow me on mining.com social media. We're Facebook, Twitter. You're welcome to send me an invitation on LinkedIn. I'd love to connect. Yeah, I'm not hard to find. Frik is a fairly unique name, so I do pop up on Google searches. Okay,
yeah, so Frik Els, mining.com. Always, for these links, go to the show notes at goldnewsletter.com/podcast. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks so much.